Join us for the Criterion Institute podcast as Joy Anderson, a global thought leader in business and social change, leads us through a series of discussions, interviews, frameworks, rants, and reframes that will help you better understand how to use finance as a tool for transformative systems change.
I am Joy Anderson, and this is the Criterion Institute podcast. So this episode is about relationships and how we create them and how we talk about them. And so the first segment is a reflection on invitation. Not a new topic for this podcast, but recently I've been thinking about the literal practices of invitation day to day. And how can we make sure that we're not confusing a real invitation with a calendar invite? The second is a rant that I've been waiting to share about handholding, a phrase that's used often in the support of entrepreneurs or investment managers that aren't considered quite up to snuff, usually women, where we're saying that they just needed a lot of hand-holding. And I swear to God, if I hear it one more time. And so my rant on hand-holding. Enjoy. So there's a moment that most of us recognize when we're sitting in a meeting, listening to a conversation and quietly wondering, do I actually need to be here? Or even more honestly, was I actually really invited into this or just expected to show up? I want to talk about something deceptively simple: invitation. Not event invitations, not calendar invitations, but invitation as a form of power. Kind of power that we all have and often forget to use. Because what I've come to see is this: the difference between work that moves and work that stalls often comes down to one thing: whether someone chose to invite. So we tend to treat invitations like administration. You invite people to meetings, events, conversations, but invitation is not about filling a room. Invitation is about how work and relationships that foster the work begins. People don't really contribute because they're informed. They contribute because they're invited into a role that matters. So leadership is often framed as direction or decision-making, but there's a quieter form of leadership the moment you choose to open the door for someone. Invitation creates participation that is not forced, and it relies on agency. The person must be able to accept or decline. And that is actually what makes an invitation powerful, is because it works independent of systems of control. So invitation matters in complex work, in complex collaborations, in places where clear lines of authority are not necessarily in place. Because especially when no one is in charge, when no one can tell anyone else what to do, invitation matters. So imagine a collaboration, consortium, a group of organizations that are working together, but the individual actors in each of the organizations didn't necessarily choose to be in the same department. I don't know, if you've ever been part of a consortium, you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's this ambiguity. I'm in one organization, you're in the other, and we're working together, but you're not really my boss. And so in general, there are multiple actors, there's shared goals, but probably different agendas and no central authority. And so I've been in a bunch of a consortium where in the absence of that central authority, process becomes the authority, or participation in a meeting becomes that authority. You need to have been at the meeting to be a part of the consortium, but you're not actually sure whether or not you were invited into this work. So in spaces where hierarchy is not clear, coordination doesn't come from control, it comes from invitation. Without invitation, people wait to be asked. They fragment their work. Meetings fill, but nothing actually moves. If people feel invited, they step in earlier, roles become visible, and the work gains momentum because people know why they're there and they believe that they are needed. So a good invitation does something very specific. It names a shared purpose without demanding agreement on everything else. It holds common ground lightly. It leaves room for difference. It doesn't erase autonomy. You don't have to become the same to work together. You need to see the overlap and feel invited into it. So an invitation can also turn a presence into a contribution. So simply accepting a calendar invite doesn't mean that I haven't decided to take that invite from a car on the way to the airport because I don't actually know if I'm needed. So many people are in meetings because they're expected or because they don't want to have something unexpected happen when they weren't there. But others are there because they feel needed. So attendance is passive. Contribution is invited. A strong invitation answers the very specific question, why you? And then there's a shift from join us to we need you here. Because the hardest work is not getting people together. It's creating togetherness without sameness. People can belong without aligning. They can collaborate. It's not the same thing as consensus. A we emerges from repeated invitation, not from an assumed agreement. So invitation is how you build a shared space that doesn't collapse the differences, that actually make it valuable. So here are 3 practices for inviting. Invite people for what they can bring. Before you invite somebody, ask not should they be there, but what changes if they're not. Second is invite earlier that feels comfortable. Too often we offer invitations after everything's thoroughly baked, and then all people are doing is listening to our PowerPoint presentation. Most invitations come too late. We're only asking for input. The work is already decided. So the third is let the even invitation stand, even if it is unmet. Not every invitation is accepted. That doesn't mean it failed. The invitation itself changes the relationship. Invitation matters regardless of response. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Where are you waiting to be invited? And when might you already hold the power to invite? Because the work we care about, the work that actually moves, creates systems change, rarely begins with perfect plans or full alignment. It begins when somebody names a possibility and invites others to step into it. Invitation's not a gesture. It's how we begin to build something together. So I want to talk about this phrase I hear all the time. I swear it comes up in the most obscure places. Handholding. It's one of those phrases that sounds harmless, but it does a lot of work under the surface. Because when they say it, they sound nice. I am holding hands, but they really mean somebody needs guidance. But what I want to reframe is to say, what if handholding is something different? What if it is actually naming what does it take to be in a place, to get to a place in a relationship where investment is even possible because somebody would want to hold your hand, kind of like that Beatles song, I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your hand, that one. That is not saying I want to guide you because I think you're incompetent. It's saying I want to be the kind of person that you trust. What if handholding is what's necessary to have enough trust to be in a relationship of investments? So recently, we worked on a learning book for the Mastercard Foundation African Growth Fund on value creation. And we actually edited out my rant about hand-holding out of the final text because it just went a little bit too far off of the very professional tone we were trying to take within this report. But what if handheld is about how people are being held within their investments? And that's the reframe I want to stay with, because that's about closeness, not about capability. It's about trust. And I don't mean trust in some fluffy way. Trust is the thing that makes it possible for someone to tell you what is actually going on in their business, what's actually working, where the real risks are. A trusted relationship creates vulnerability. In fact, that kind of vulnerability is really not optional if you're taking investment capital from somebody else. But that vulnerability is often the condition that also makes real diligence possible. Because if I am not feeling vulnerable enough to be open to you, then I am covering up the stuff that you need to know, which is why you might feel like I need to be guided like a small child, as opposed to trusted in a relationship where we are close enough to be able to share the truth. So, to get concrete, we've heard over and over again, especially from women building investment vehicles, that they're inundated, literally inundated, with helpful comments about what they should do. In fact, so many helpful comments that they often cannot figure out anymore what they should be doing because there's so much help telling them to do different things. And the line that matters in this is when those comments come from someone who might invest, they do not feel like suggestions, they feel like obligations. So what looks like support is actually using your power as an investor to shape behavior. And suddenly closeness isn't mutual, it's directional. And that's the thing we have to get honest about. Investing is never neutral. This is the thing we have to get honest about. In investing, advice is never neutral. It is acting almost always in the interest of the investor who wants to put capital someplace and wants that place to work for them. So this is one of the core practices Criterion keeps central to our work, is to ask, do we have permission to teach? Because closeness, advice, needs to be chosen, not an intrusion. Without permission, that hand-holding, which could be a light, we're in this together, I'm a form of support, becomes intrusion. asking permission before asking guidance is essential, and recognizing that advice only works when it's welcomed. That's the shift from hierarchy to partnership. So one of the things that we hear pretty often as a really practical example is that pretty often companies that are offered value creation support, they're sort of offered by the investor additional support to improve their business. They can't engage, not because they don't want to, but because the literal reality of running the business means they don't have the time or the space or the team to take on one more thing. Most companies seeking early stage investment, most investment vehicles building in markets that are not easy to work, don't have the time, are operating with lean teams. People are wearing multiple hats. They don't have someone who can just go implement the advice. So the ability to use services to take in feedback, to respond to what someone is offering, is actually determined by their day-to-day operational reality. So what gets labeled as they really needed hand-holding is often actually our attempt to support didn't align with their capacity to take it. So closeness in this sense includes timing. It includes a respect for the reality of how work gets done. There's another layer to this. Services or support for investors, whether they're service paid for by investors or the time of the investors themselves, are there to reduce investment risk. But businesses buy services to manage their own business risk. And so you have two different logic in the same interaction. The investor is asking, what reduces my risk? And the entrepreneur is asking, what keeps this business alive? And those are not always the same thing. So what shows up as, well, they're just not really taking the advice, just feels like I need to hold their hand through all of this, could actually be a clash of priorities around risks. And again, we fall back on this language. Oh, they just needed more hand-holding. What we're really saying is there's a misalignment in what risk is being managed and for whom. One of my favorite practices that we talked about in this learning book was about restitution meetings. So this is one of the things that closeness looks like when it's done well. So what does it look like when closeness is done well? It's when founders are encouraged to push back, ask questions, clarify, disagree. And that's the moment when closeness becomes mutual, where trust is built without taking away agency. So if we're going to keep using this phrase, hand-holding, let's make it mean something precise. It is the closeness that actually makes investments possible. And it has 4 conditions. First of all, it has permission. The advice is invited. It is not assumed. The second is there are boundaries. Just because I wanted your advice on one thing doesn't mean I also want you to tell me how I should do my hair. So roles and expectations are clear, and there's boundaries around what is mine to lead and where it is an agreement where we are walking together. The third is that vulnerabilities are protected. Because the reality is that the person receiving the investments is the one who has the vulnerability in this hand-holding situation. And so you want to make sure that in that moment of trust, when somebody is actually walking alongside you, figuring out how to do this together, that transparency shouldn't be punished. If I shared something in this moment of closeness where I wanted to say, wow, I really trust you, let me tell you what's really happening here, that transparency should never be punished. And finally, there need to be moments to recalibrate. Just because I chose to hold your hand on one day doesn't mean I want to hold the next day. Everything requires consent. And so without permission, boundaries, protection of vulnerabilities, and alignment, what we call support quietly becomes control. So a couple questions to reflect on. Where are you using the word help when you actually mean influence or obligation? Where have you watched advice shift behavior simply because capital was present? And do you ever do that? Whose capacity is being accounted for in your expectations of engagement? If they seem like they need more hand-holding and are not properly following your lead, are there other reasons for that? Where is the difference between who experiences what risk, shaping what advice is given and whether it's followed? Where do you need to realign? How do you call for the moment that says, we need to step back and figure out where we are together in this relationship? Not because something failed, but because relationships drift, because terms change over the course of a due diligence process. And sometimes those can go on for a long time. So what actually shifts over that time period, and when do things need to be reset? What are the boundaries that are missing that would protect agency without losing closeness? And if you replaced hand-holding with a relationship or a trust infrastructure, what would you build differently? What would you invest in that relationship?
For over 20 years, Criterion has been shaped by the people who showed up, curious, committed, and willing to learn how finance can be used to shift systems and advance gender equality. There's more than one way to work with us, and we've created volunteer opportunities for different types of contributors. One way is through the Criterion Fellowship. The Criterion Fellowship is a structured voluntary program that offers deep learning, access to our tools and frameworks, and the opportunity to contribute to real, meaningful work alongside of our team. The value is real. Learning how systems change actually happens, access to people and ideas shaping the field, and the chance to help more people see finance as a tool that they can use. If you don't know us already, your first step is to start showing up at our events. Our events are interactive learning spaces where you can join in conversations and contribute where your curiosity and capacity align. We believe in porous boundaries. People come closer for a season, step away for a time, and return in new ways. Some want structure and immersion. Others want to engage more informally. All of it matters. We work to expand what is seen as possible for using finance as a tool for social change. We would love to work together with you. If you're drawn to the work, come learn with us. Come contribute, come be part of the work that matters.
To learn more about our work, visit us at criterioninstitute.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help our podcast reach a wider audience. Thanks for listening.